In this video, we're going to do a few examples finding probabilities given a contingency table. So a contingency table is like this one right here, where we have different numbers of data broken up into different categories. Sometimes you'll have a column that gives the total in different categories, and sometimes that might not be present. But if it's not, you can of course just add the values in that table to find the total of the number of values that are of that category, say the silent generation in that case. So let's look at this table and answer. So this was a survey of number of hours of internet use per week by different generation. So if an individual from this study is randomly chosen, what is the probability that that individual is a baby boomer? What is the probability that that individual uses the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week? The probability that they're a millennial or use the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week. The probability that they are a millennial who uses the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week. The probability that they use the internet fewer than 11 hours per week, given that or knowing that they're from the silent generation. And finally, the probability that they are from the silent generation, given that they use the internet fewer than 11 hours per week. So try those out and we'll talk about them together in just a moment. So pause and try those. Okay, let's take a look at these. So the probability that the individual selected is a baby boomer would just be the total number of baby boomers divided by the total number of people in the survey. And so the probability that they are a baby boomer, we could abbreviate that as B if we wished, is 90 out of 350. And we could leave our answer like that, or we could reduce it, or we could turn it into a decimal by dividing, and that would give us 0.257. What is the probability that that individual uses the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week? So what's the probability that they're in this category? I'm going to call that event A. You, of course, can call it whatever you want, but the probability that they use the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week is total of people in that category, 115 over 350. And again, if we divide, we will get 0.329 as our probability. So what's the probability that they are a millennial or use the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week? So there are different ways we could approach this. One is to use the addition rule, and so the probability that they're a millennial or use the internet between 21 and 29 hours a week is the probability that they're a millennial plus probability that they use the internet that amount minus the probability that both are true, that they're a millennial and they use the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week. That's the addition rule that we learned earlier. And so that would be equal to probability that they're a millennial. That's, that's a total of 115 out of the, that is the total of millennials, 110 out of 350. So 110 out of 350 is the probability that they are a millennial. The probability of A, we already found above, the probability that they use the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week is 115, so 115 out of 350. And then we want to subtract off the probability that both of those things are true, because those 41 people were both counted as millennials and they were counted as people who use the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week. So minus 41 over 350. And if you calculate that, you should get 0.5257 as your probability. Another way you could calculate that is just calculate it as a single fraction. So that's also equal to all of the millennials plus all of the people who use the internet between 21 and 29 hours per week, minus the people who are in both categories, that's 41, and then divide by the total of 350. And because when you add fractions, you just add across the numerators and keep the denominator the same, we would get the same answer in either case. Finally, what's the probability that they're a millennial who uses the internet between 11 and 20 hours per week? Well, again, that's this group of people right here. So that's 41 out of 350, and that would give us 0.117 if we divide. All right, so moving on to 5 and 6, let's get a blank page so we can see the table at the same time. So what's the probability that they use the internet fewer than 11 hours per week, given that they are from the silent generation? Fewer than 11 hours per week, I'm going to call that event F, and I'm going to call being from the silent generation event S. So we're looking for the probability that they use the internet for fewer than 11 hours per week, given that or knowing that they're from the silent generation. So there's different ways to do this as well. One would be to use the formula that we had before, that the probability of F given S is the probability of F and S both being true divided by the probability of S. So what's the probability of F and S? The probability that the person is both from the silent generation and uses the internet for fewer than 11 hours per week. That's 24 out of the total of 350. So that's the probability of F and S divided by the probability of just S. So how many people are from the silent generation? This is 60 people that are in the silent generation in this survey divided by 350. If you divide fractions, remember that dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So that's 24 over 350 times 350 over 60. That would then the 350s cancel out, and we're left with 24 over 60, which is the same thing as 0.4 if we divide to get a decimal, so 0.4. Note that the denominators canceled out, and they always would. So another way we could approach this is to say, okay, out of all of the people who were from the silent generation, so given that they're from the silent generation, that means that out of all those people, how many of them also had the quality that they use the internet between 0 and 10 hours per week? Well, 24 of those people. And so another way that we could approach that problem is to say that the probability that they use the internet for fewer than 11 hours per week, given that they're from the silent generation, is 24 out of 60. And obviously that's the same thing that we got over here. Finally, what is the probability that they are from the silent generation, given that they use the internet fewer than 11 hours per week? So that's the reverse probability that they are from the silent generation, given that they use the internet fewer than 11 hours per week. So now we know that we're in this category. We're only interested in this group of people, and so the denominator is going to be 48 now, and the number of people in that category who are from the silent generation is 24, so 24 out of 48 is 0.5.